miles per hour in the most exposed spots, perhaps even a little bit stronger than that as a small core of very strong winds pushes through during tomorrow morning. Further south there will be some rain to start off with, but that should clear away towards the east as we head towards lunchtime, and actually the whole system that is Storm Lillian clears away towards the North Sea. And so for much of England and Wales it's going to be a largely bright sunny afternoon with temperatures a touch higher than today. Further north temperatures a little bit lower, but there will also be a scattering of showers, and some of these could be quite heavy. Looking ahead to the long weekend, and watch out for some heavy rain towards the southeast on Saturday. Elsewhere, quite a few showers to watch out for, but that rain in the southeast does clear away, and then for quite a few places, Sunday is looking a little bit drier, albeit some heavy rain crossing northern parts, and then more wet weather could push through in from the west on Monday, but it should be a mostly dry start. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss out on your chance to win a whopping £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. It's extra cash that could really make a difference to your coming year. You could find yourself on that holiday you've always wanted to take, buy that treat that always seemed out of reach, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could be yours, but time is ticking. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, live from God's own county of Somerset on State of the Nation tonight. The Labour Party may be trying to worm its way out of Brexit, as reports have suggested that it wants to get back into freedom of movement, willing to reopen the EU floodgates. But just today, more evidence of vindicating Brexit has emerged. Meanwhile, the inevitability of tax rises has been dubbed the Reeves squeeze, with reports suggesting the Chancellor will target inheritance tax and capital gains, doing untold damage to the economy. in a sensational return for the great Boris Johnson on the cards. That's what Tory leadership candidate Robert Jenrick has called for, suggesting it yesterday. Plus, speaking of Johnsons, the great Stanley Johnson has returned from China after making his new film. All will be revealed shortly. State of the Nation starts now. Holding the State of the Nation flabellum for this evening is the author, filmmaker and former MEP Stanley Johnson. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog at gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite part of the day, the News Bulletin with Cameron Walker.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. It is 1 minute past 8. I'm Cameron Walker here in the GB newsroom. 2 people have been injured after a stabbing at Chessington World of Adventures theme park near London, with one taken to a major trauma centre. Police were called just after 2:30 p.m. this afternoon and found a man in a car park with knife wounds and another found on a nearby road with minor injuries. A third man has been arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm, and police believe that all the men are known to each other. Nobody else is thought to be involved. Figures shown to GB News reveal the number of visas issued to work dependents was down 50% between April and June this year compared to the previous 3 months. 35,603 work-dependent visas were handed out in the last quarter compared to 71,583 between January and March of this year. That's a fall of over 35,000. A Romanian court has decided internet personality Andrew Tate should be placed under house arrest. Prosecutors have requested that Tate be detained for 30 more days after he was among 6 people taken into custody in an investigation into human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Andrew Tate denies all the allegations levelled against him. Now, a senior Labour MP is demanding the government answers why a convicted killer of a Newcastle teenager is being released early. Gordon Galt was 14 when he died in hospital 6 days after he was attacked with a blade in Elmswick in November 2022. Lawson Natey was sentenced to 2 years, 8 months for manslaughter and unlawful wounding, but is due to be released after serving just 40% of his jail term. The government plans to release some prisoners, including Natey, early to free up prison capacity. But the Newcastle MP Chi Onwurah wants an explanation from the Ministry of Justice. The BBC presenter and ex-footballer Jermaine Jenas has been sacked from presenting The One Show and Match of the Day after alleged complaints about his behaviour. Jenas was reportedly removed from the primetime BBC One programmes following an internal investigation by the corporation. A BBC spokesperson said, "We can confirm he is no longer part of our presenting lineup." Meanwhile, his agency MC Saatchi is no longer representing him, but Jenas says there are 2 sides to every story and I'm going to be speaking with my lawyers on the issue. A drug found to slow down Alzheimer's has been given the green light for use in Britain, but it may not be rolled out on the NHS because it's too expensive. The charity Alzheimer's Research UK has urged the Health Secretary to step in, warning it would only be available to those who could pay for it privately. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which provides national health advice, says the benefits are too small to justify the costs. Well, those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Now it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Fewer than 10 weeks of Labour being in charge and the great Brexit betrayal is already underway. Government sources have briefed The Times that ministers are willing to give ground on a youth mobility scheme that would give young EU citizens the right to work in the UK. And that could be thousands of them. If this happens, it is merely the first of many steps towards bringing us back under the yoke of the European Union. One of the key reasons for leaving the European Union was a rejection of mass migration, and today some legal migration figures came out that showed the last Conservative government's policies were beginning to work. So a move like this would represent a betrayal of one of the greatest democratic exercises in British history. But government sources picked the wrong day to brief the papers about this signal that the UK is moving back into alignment with Europe. You'll hear the clock striking in the background. As you know, Somerset time is a few minutes behind Greenwich Mean Time. So you may have seen the deeply encouraging news that the United Kingdom has approved lecanemab, the first ever Alzheimer's drug that has been shown to slow cognitive decline by about 27%. The United States has approved the drug too, but lo and behold, the European Union has rejected this drug owing to concerns about side effects. Its ever-present precautionary principle means that people can't get life-saving treatments that will make their standard of living, their experience in old age, so much better. Why, when people are suffering from Alzheimer's, would the EU not allow patients who would be well informed of the side effects to at least try a new drug that is the first to be shown to delay some symptoms? Because the European Union is an overly regulated and overly risk-averse institution, which we're lucky to be out of. Sir Keir Starmer, whether he pursues a youth mobility agreement or not, clearly wants to pursue closer ties with the EU. But this decision from the EU regulator is a microcosm for why the Prime Minister should not look to align further with the European Union. And the question arises whether this Alzheimer's drug will be available in Northern Ireland, which is compulsory aligned with the European Union. The EU prides itself on its high level of regulatory interference, which it pursues regardless of the consequences. In reality, what it does is to stifle economic growth, which lowers everyone's standard of living. Compare the size of the US and EU economies over recent years. In 2010, both economies were roughly the same size, about $15 trillion in GDP. But nearly 15 years later, the EU economy has barely grown to $18 trillion, while the US economy has steamed ahead to $23 trillion. This gap ought to tell the Prime Minister everything he needs to know. The future of British prosperity does not lie with the EU, but with the United States and the Pacific. Not only should he resist any temptation to implement a youth mobility scheme, but he should focus on alignment with the serious economies overseas to unleash Britain's economy and improve living standards for all. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. But with me now is the GB News senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, welcome. Thank you for joining me as usual on a Thursday. Normally I see you in person, but today we're remote. This is Labour trying to get back into the EU by stealth, isn't it?
No, not even nearly. First of all, the youth mobility scheme doesn't look as if it's going to happen. That the usual sort of weaselly, ambiguous Whitehall words are no plans. In fact, the government have gone further than that and said they're not even considering it, which is a bit more concrete. The idea at the moment is to get obviously closer ties with Europe, but when it comes down to young people, it's things like making school trips easier, student exchanges, cultural visits, that kind of thing. However, I think that they should have a youth mobility scheme. We've got it with several other countries. It works very well. There's no reason not to do it. It has nothing to do with the idea of going back to freedom of movement.
But we've got it with other countries like Australia, where the numbers coming will be similar in either direction. The thing about the EU is that the population is so much larger in the EU than here that it will be disproportionately EU nationals coming to the UK. And so many people voted to leave because they wanted to control migration. And this is a classic thin end of the wedge.
Well, people who come here would need to have a job to come to. If they want to volunteer, they need an organisation to go and do it. So it's not open-ended. And it's not just places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada. We've also got similar arrangements with Uruguay, with Japan, with South Korea. They work perfectly well. Our young people can go over there. How much better for young people to go to Europe if you want to train as a barista in Spain, for instance, and learn how to make coffee, learn the skill, then come back here.
Well, I would have thought because simply the numbers, and that we've seen this before, that the Home Office, when we opened up EU free movement in the early 2000s, said it would only be a few thousand people, and then hundreds of thousands, eventually millions came, which we couldn't even count. When we offered the right of residency to EU member state nationals when we left the European Union, I think there ended up being 6 million of them, many, many more, millions more than had been forecast.
Yeah, but this is not free movement. This has got nothing to do with with free movement. What we're talking about here is a visa lasting 3 years. Then these people will go home. They have to pay the NHS surcharge to come here. Have to have several £1,000s in savings. They can't bring family. So it's time limited, and nothing. And there's no question they would get settled status once they come here.
Well, we've seen that before, though, haven't we? That people come here for a short time. We've seen this with students who come and end up staying well beyond the time they're meant to and then enter the illegal market. So I'm not convinced that this will be run efficiently by the Home Office, which has no record of running immigration schemes competently.
Well, that's a different argument. If people actually overstay, then they're committing an offence.
It's the same thing. That if you open it up so that more people can come and you just think, oh, they will go, that is showing an enormous naivety. And I would argue that it isn't naivety. They know perfectly well that people will stay and they don't mind because Labour likes mass migration. It is part of its fundamental policy and it wants to get back to it by stealth. And when you said at the beginning that they've promised not to, they promised that there wasn't a black hole, and then they said as soon as they got into government that there was a black hole. So you can't trust a word they say.
Well, the black hole is a completely different area, which I'm sure we're coming on to. When it comes to this, anybody coming into Heathrow Airport can overstay their welcome. So either you ban all visitors from Britain just in case they stay longer than they should, or you accept that these schemes actually work and can be for the benefit both of this country and other countries.
Well, thank you, Nigel. I hope to see you personally next week. But with me now is today's holder of the State of the Nation flabellum, the great Stanley Johnson. Stanley, do you think this is the thin end of the wedge?
I don't. I listened to the debate you've just had with Nigel Nelson. And I've got to tell you, I agreed very much with what Nigel said. Of course, you could say, I hear tonight as someone who's just followed Marco Polo. Marco Polo was the great bridge builder, you know, the historic bridge builder. Yes, of course, bridge building is in my bones. In this particular case, I'm with Nigel Nelson because what are we talking about? We're talking about building links for youth. We've already, I think, pursued the Horizon scheme. The question is whether we will go down the Erasmus route. I would say that this has nothing to do with mass migration. I support him very much on that. I go further, as a matter of fact, and without saying we're revisiting the whole European debate. As you know, I was a Remainer. I very much thought it was a mistake to leave. As a matter of fact, if you look at the current polling by, I think, YouGov last night, they said 59% of the people they tested would
but almost all the polls before we left said people wanted to stay. So I treat the polling with some caution.
Right. But coming back to this one, I would say this is a natural. It's a winner. We should do it. I go further, and I've been arguing for some time that on key issues like some of these scientific issues, environment would be one of them. Years ago, when I was a fonctionnaire in Brussels, and then later on I became an MEP, I wrote the rules for the European Environment Agency. All the time we were in the European Union, we were part of the European Environment Agency. I wrote an article in there which said non-EU countries must be members, and they are. There are several non-EU countries. So this bridge building thing, I think, is absolutely crucial. Your point is that it holds back growth. I would First, I don't regard growth as being necessarily a good thing automatically under all circumstances. Growth is depending on how fast your population rises. If your population doesn't rise...
But you need GDP per capita growth, not just GDP growth, and that we've been getting GDP growth, but actually it's been shrinking in GDP per capita terms because of mass migration.
Agree with you totally on that. My line is if you want GDP capita growth, then the sensible thing is to control the capita.
That's right, that's right. And this is where I'm worried about this proposal, because
yes, I see your point.
The British voter is now very fed up with mass migration, that they feel they've been taken for granted, and the governments, including Conservative governments, have promised to reduce migration and they haven't. You then get a new government that comes in and it says we're going to be very tough and we're going to deport people, and then it says quietly, and then we're going to up a new scheme that allows tens of thousands of people to come. I think this is just disrespectful to voters who have asked the government to do something else, and the government has implied it will do something else.
Well, what you say is basically right, in the sense that politicians, including Conservative politicians, made some very clear pledges. I go back to when you were elected in 2010, you were elected with the Cameron government. As I recall, Cameron said tens of thousands. Right. That was his target. We are so far away from tens of thousands, it's laughable.
And so that, I think, is very important.
Yeah,
if we were close to tens of thousands, then fair enough to say, for all the arguments you give, that we want to have cultural exchanges, we will open it up a little and we'll allow some more young people to come. When you've had 1.4 million in 2 years, legal migrants, then you're taking people for granted, aren't you, when you suddenly come up with a new route that makes it easier for them to come in?
All right, well, I suppose what I would say on this particular scheme, I would say you need to be very, very careful just to make it clear that these are, as it were, student exchange schemes, and yes, your point about the imbalance is a good one, and we would need to be sure that 10,000 Brits doesn't mean 28,000 coming in.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much to Stanley and Nigel. We will be moving on in a moment, and we'll be assessing what has been dubbed the Reeves squeeze. Will the Chancellor be coming even more after your money next? And we'll be hearing more from Nigel Nelson on the tyranny of 20 miles per hour zones. And I'm not sure he's going to read the mail logs because there's been so much competition between my children to decide which one it should be. So it'll be a surprise for me as well as for you.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Should footballers just stop taking the knee? It's time for our head-to-head.
I don't want to see people on their knees. I want to see the FA or UEFA or all of those FIFA all leading from the top. And that would be that if half of the players, and it's practically half of them, are of colour, why is that not even remotely replicated at the top? So to me, I just see it as an empty gesture. What is the point of it? It's been going on for years and still not much has happened. And the bottom line is this: these clubs are rich. Football is rich. Everything. If they really wanted to prosecute racists on the terraces, they really could, and they haven't. And they've had years to do it. So why would getting down on one knee now change it? It's not changing anything. It needs to start from the top, and it hasn't.
I do wonder, Jason, whether or not it has much of an impact. I mean, at the start of games or in the highlight shows, etc., match of the day, it does seem like, right, OK, so we'll take the knee, and the commentator will go out of his way or her way to tell us what a wonderful thing this is. And, suspiciously at times I do wonder whether or not the fan sound goes down, because I've been at a few football games where it's not been that well received, but you don't tend to see that in the highlight shows. And then there might be a round of applause for something else, and there might be something else going on, and eventually we get a bit of football. Do the fans actually like this?
I don't know. You have to ask them, to be honest. I think there are many different people why they boo. That people do think it's virtual signalling, that it's done for show. But I think that it can only be a good thing in my mind that we are discussing this, and we all realise I think in 100 years' time, this conversation could still be going on. There still needs to be work done. There still needs to make sure that the Argentinian national side to be singing racist songs about black African-American footballers that now play for the French national side are getting racially abused. That tells me only one thing, that the message is still not getting across.
GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one
will be cancelled.
Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we've been talking about EU free movement, and your views have been coming in. And Peter's very kindly made way for an enthusiastic Alfred, who wishes to read out the mail mogs. Alfred, what have we had in today?
Robert says, Starmer said repeatedly that Labour do not want to rejoin the EU. Maybe so, but he's clearly just going to erode our freedom step by step.
Yes, I think that's right. And he was, of course, very keen on a second referendum. What else have we got?
Philip says, Jacob, surely if a few people come just for a few years, it isn't a problem.
Well, that's if they go again in the end. And the problem is, when they get here, they like to stay, because when people get to Somerset, why on earth would they want to go anywhere else? Anyway, by now, it is no secret that Chancellor Rachel Reeves is planning to increase your taxes after the dishonestly manufactured shock over the invented 20 billion fiscal hole she announced a few weeks ago.
Have inherited a projected overspend of £22 billion. A £22 billion hole in the public finances now. Yeah. Not in the future, but now. £22 billion of spending this year that was covered up.
Well, sorry, I've lost connection with GB News central office, but over-the-wire message now seems to have come that I must start again. Obviously, this was a cynical pretense used to increase your taxes, but the question is, what taxes will it be? Reports have suggested this Chancellor is likely to go after inheritance tax and capital gains. Well, still with me is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Nigel, this is a matter of trust, isn't it? And that in a few short weeks, nobody can trust Rachel Reeves.
Well, I mean, it rather depends on whether you believe in the black hole that she found. I mean, it was obviously no secret there was a hole in the government finances. The question was how big, and even the Institute for Fiscal Studies said there were things in there they didn't know, that the Treasury had spent its reserve on various things that your lot had rather recklessly blown money on. So that had disappeared. They didn't know about the extra £6.9 billion on the asylum bill, and so it went on. So it is a question of what size it is. But yes, you're right. She's announced that there will be tax increases in the budget.
Yes, but the issue is that she said that there wasn't a black hole. It's under 1% of the total economy, so it's not actually this enormous amount. And about half of it, slightly more, is from the enormous pay rises that Labour has given to its trade union friends. So she's created a black hole to the extent there is one, and then blames the Tories. It's just not straight with the British people.
Well, nor were your lot. I mean, the one thing about the black hole is that you hadn't funded pay increases beyond 2%. Now, 2% was obviously a nonsense figure, and you should have had money in the bank ready to actually pay out a bit more than that. Obviously, the argument is over whether it should have been 5.5% or something else. So Rachel Reeves has spent that money. That has settled the various strikes that we were going through.
But Nigel, that must be wrong. That if you're putting a budget together and it's a public budget and you say that you are budgeting for 5% pay increases, that will be the minimum for pay increases. In your negotiation, you have to keep your cards close to your chest, and all governments, all wise governments, do that, surely.
Well, I mean, these pay increases have actually been settled. So teachers, 5.5%, nurses, 5.5%, 14% for train drivers, but that is over 3 years. So those things have been sorted out, and this time round they're budgeted for, which of course your lot didn't do.
Well, they're budgeted for as they were agreed, but a whopping 22% for the junior doctors, which I would have thought will mean the nurses come back for more. This is the union paymasters getting their payoff, and it's old Labour back to the 70s. Let's fill the boots of our union supporters with gold coins.
Or you could take the view that they're paying people what they actually deserve. And certainly after the 11% inflation that we had previously, and the fact wages had fallen behind so far, it was right to come to a reasonable deal. I mean, many of these people, including the doctors, for instance, aren't getting back all the money that they've lost over the last 14 years. But at least they're getting some of it back. And where we are at the moment is that should actually result in more industrial harmony than we've had over the last few years.
Well, do you think it will? Because I see the Fire Brigade's unions now said it wants a very hefty pay rise, that other unions have seen this largesse and they're going to use their strike muscle to try and get more money, and that this has a very profound effect on the economy and leads to higher taxes because it's got to be paid for by the private sector, because without the private sector there's no money at all.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing there is a question of whether you think that the 2% that was knocking about before the election was the right amount to give people. So it seems to me that to try and settle the various strikes that were going on, you're predicting strikes in the future. We don't know that. It's certainly the job of a union is to look after its members. I understand that. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to end up with more strikes. At least what has happened now is this government is sitting down with the unions and talking to them, which is what the Tory government didn't do, which caused a lot of the problems.
Well, it didn't really, because if you're not going to give lots of money, having a polite conversation doesn't make any difference, does it? It's not about the conversation, it's about the cash. And you don't have strikes if you just give people lots of money. If Labour's splashing about oodles of taxpayers' cash, people won't go on strike, but they will ask for more and more and more, because if you pay the Dane Geld, the Dane doesn't go away.
Well, I mean, so the Vikings didn't go away when we paid them off, so that didn't work. But it comes down to a question about fairness, doesn't it? If you feel that nurses and teachers ought to get 5.5%, which strikes me as a pretty reasonable settlement, that is what you should do. So what has happened is they've got that money. Let's see what happens next year when another pay round will come along. But I don't see the same kind of industrial strife happening over the next few years that we saw over the last few years.
All right, well, thank you for that, Nigel, because I also wanted to ask you about 20-mile-an-hour zones, because the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, has declared local councils will have her absolute support in introducing more 20 mph speed limits and low-traffic neighbourhoods. And I hate to say it, we warned about this, and this is Labour in Whitehall copying Labour in Wales, and Labour in Wales has been useless.
Well, Labour in Wales actually admits that they've got this 20-mile-an-hour speed limits wrong, so they're having a review next month to try and sort it out. But yes, surely it must be right that local authorities are the ones to decide where 20 mph limits ought to be. It's not something that should come down from central government. They can't know what is happening on small roads around the country, and basically you just you put them where they are needed. It'd be quite clearly an absurd if you had a 20 mph speed limit on the M1, but not so absurd outside a school where children are 8 times more likely to be killed at 20 miles an hour than they would be at 30 miles an hour than they would be at 20.
Well, Nigel, on this I agree with you, and I think the temporary limits that they have outside schools of 20 miles an hour when people are arriving and leaving work really well, because people obey them because they see their purpose. When you've got 20 miles an hour on an empty road, an empty A road at midnight, they are completely pointless, and there are an awful lot of those. And I wouldn't actually particularly trust local governments, many of whom are not particularly competent.
Well, whether they're competent or not, I would prefer that they were looking at it and giving their local residents a say in it, not a veto, but a say in it, than I'd like to see Whitehall doing it, which would probably be even less competent. So, yes, you're right. I mean, on an MTA road, it would be ridiculous, but on smaller roads inside towns and cities, they seem to make sense.
But the government sets the overall guidelines. I don't disagree with you that you don't want the government to set every single speed limit across the country, but it used to have a minimum of 30, and it reduced that to 20, which I think has been a huge irritation to motorists. And it shows once again that the Labour government isn't on your side. It's on the side of the bureaucrat, it's on the side of the bossy official, not on the side of voters. And if you look what TfL is doing, it's trying to get a lot of its income from fining people. It's even given the Metropolitan Police a target for the fines it must implement. And that seems to me to be unjust.
Yeah, but equally it's unjust. If you don't have a 20 mph speed limit, a car travelling at 20 mph will stop within 40 foot of a child stepping out in front of the road. A car travelling at 25 mph won't. It won't be able to stop. So I see these things as on the side of children rather than anything else.
All right, well, thank you, Nigel. It's such a pleasure to have at least one half of my most intellectual panel on this evening. Coming up, could we be on the precipice of a mighty return of the great Boris Johnson? Who better to ask than his father, Stanley? Plus, if you've ever wanted to see Stanley Johnson riding a yak along the Silk Road, stay tuned.
Good evening. Here's your latest Met Office weather forecast for GB News. Storm Lilian is knocking on the door and it's going to bring some unseasonably wet and windy weather to many parts, but particularly in the north as we go through the rest of today, overnight into tomorrow. There is a system that's coming in from the west and it's this that is Storm Lilian, already bringing some very wet weather across Northern Ireland this evening, and that heavy rain and the strong winds will feed into parts of Scotland, England and Wales as we go overnight. The highest rainfall totals likely to be across parts of southwest Scotland, also some eastern coastal parts where a bit of flooding and some disruption quite likely. The wind, the rain, the cloud will keep temperatures up, so a relatively warm but very wet and windy start to the day for many of us on Friday. As we go through Friday itself then, yes, it is going to be a wet start across eastern parts of Scotland in particular, but towards the west here there will be some hefty showers following in behind the persistent rain. Showers also for Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, for Northern England there will be some heavy rain around, but it's the winds that are causing the greatest concern. We're likely to see gusts of around 65 to 75 miles per hour in the most exposed spots, perhaps even a little bit stronger than that as a small core of very strong winds pushes through during tomorrow morning. Further south there will be some rain to start off with, but that should clear away towards the east as we head towards lunchtime, and actually the whole system that is Storm Lilian clears away towards the North Sea, and so for much of England and Wales it's going to be a largely bright sunny afternoon with temperatures a touch higher than today. Further north temperatures a little bit lower, but there will also be a scattering of showers and some of these could be quite heavy. Looking ahead to the long weekend, and watch out for some heavy rain towards the southeast on Saturday. Elsewhere quite a few showers to watch out for, but that rain in the southeast does clear away, and then for quite a few places Sunday is looking a little bit drier, albeit some heavy rain crossing northern parts, and then more wet weather could push through in from the west on Monday, but it should be a mostly dry start. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about taxes and 20 mph zones, and the mail mogs have steamed in. John says, why doesn't Nigel Nelson support pensioners to be paid at least the minimum wage? Oh, forgot. We don't have a union. Perhaps we should form one. And Eileen says, please ask Mr Johnson if his son Boris would run again for Prime Minister. He is a better candidate than any we have on the list, as long as he takes it seriously. Well, that's a very nice lead-in, because Robert Jenrick, Tory leadership hopeful, has said he would be delighted to have the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson in his shadow cabinet. He said that if the Conservatives wanted to be a strong opposition to Starmer's government, they needed the best people who are available in the Conservative family to be on the pitch. After being thrown out of Number 10 and then resigning as an MP, because of the fallout of the Partygate scandal, would a sensational return from the former Prime Minister be just what the Tories need to rejuvenate the party? Well, with me now is the State of the Nation flabellum holder for this evening, the author, filmmaker and former MEP, Stanley Johnson, who also, among his many distinguished children, is the father of Boris. So, were you pleased that Robert said Boris should come back?
Quite intriguing. I read the story as well. Intriguing for any number of reasons. I mean, constitutionally, I mean, you're the constitutionalist much more than me, Jacob, but constitutionally, I just think it's quite interesting. Were we talking about the cabinet as opposed to the shadow cabinet, and were we talking about the position of Prime Minister or the Senior Minister or whatever, there is, I think, a tiny precedent. I'm much older than you are, and I can absolutely remember when Douglas Hume succeeded Macmillan, and there was a kind of hiatus. It was a hiatus of weeks, as I remember. Well, he was still, as it were, the Earl of... No, he'd just given up his title as the Earl of Hume, but he hadn't yet found the seat he got in Scotland. It was only a matter of weeks, but possibly even of days. But nonetheless, for a time, he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, being in neither house. Okay, so that's on the assumption that you're talking about the cabinet. Now, it's intriguing to think about the shadow cabinet. Is the shadow cabinet bound by, the same sort of constitutional arrangements? Do you see what I'm getting at?
I think it's a very good point, because I don't think the shadow cabinet is, particularly not a post like Conservative Party chairman. So if Robert Jenrick wanted to make Boris Conservative Party chairman and Boris were willing to do it, there'd be absolutely nothing to stop that.
Well, actually, you just raised a point. I suspect, and you're much closer to this than I am, I suspect that the chairman of the Conservative Party, in a situation where the Tory party is in opposition, does probably attend shadow cabinet meetings.
Yes.
Now, there you get into another little the business of who's in the cabinet and who is attending cabinet. So you might have the same, as it were, constitutional trick. Who's in the shadow cabinet, who is attending shadow cabinet. Now, on the fundamental issue, I really can't comment. You know my personal view as that the Conservative Party, particularly the members of the Conservative Party, behaved absolutely abominably in the way they treated Boris. And I think, in a way, the Tories at the last election got what they deserved.
Well, I don't disagree with that, as you know. I supported Boris so long that I went into the Cabinet Office and somebody stuck a microphone up my nose and said, do you think Boris should go on? I said, absolutely. He should go on as long as Walpole. Then I got to my office, he'd already resigned. So I went on too long.
However, it's totally hypothetical.
But do you think he'd like to do it? Has he still got the fire in his belly? Because you'd probably be pretty good at it if you were called. You'd like to do it.
Well, if I were called at the age of 90, I mean, you've got to imagine conceivably that the Labour Party will last a term. Can't imagine, can't be sure of that, of course. Also, many things could happen. Many things could happen, but I would certainly be 87 when that happened. On the other hand, it's not up to me, and I can't say. All I will say is, let's look at history here. My recollection is that Churchill was 65 when he became Prime Minister. he wasn't even elected Prime Minister that first time. He emerged as Prime Minister from the... He was actually, in 1952, when he was elected for the first time, by a process of elimination, he must have been
nearly 80. Yes, he was nearly 80 by that point, and Gladstone was over 80, and Palmerston was over 80.
Yeah.
And we see
so
American politicians...
I don't think that, on the other hand, looking at what's happening in America at the moment, and looking at the apparently extraordinary change in the feeling of politics over the last few weeks, appears to be not so much that Trump is awful, but actually, you know, he suddenly looks an old man now that Biden has disappeared.
But Boris is only 60, so he's still quite young. Is he interested still?
You know, I can't comment. I can't comment. I absolutely can't. I shall wait to hear his speech when he, as it were, assuming I'm invited to the launch of his new book, and I see that's going to happen in October, probably after the Tory party conference. And if he takes questions, somebody may ask that question. I shall wait to hear what his answer is. I don't have an answer.
But it's an interesting thought, isn't it, that a senior contender, one of the front runners to be the next leader of the party, really wants to have a former leader back. That hasn't tended to happen in recent history. You've got to go back into the past.
Well, hold on.
It happened with Alec Douglas-Hume, that Ted Heath brought him back. It happened with William Hague, but William Hague hadn't been Prime Minister. It's not usual.
Well, Mr. Cameron was brought in by Rishi
Sunak.
So that took everyone by surprise, I think.
And wasn't necessarily hugely successful.
No, but it does make the point
that it can happen.
Even a former Prime Minister can be pitchforked into, in this particular case, he was put in the House of Lords. You know, Cameron was.
So you can get somebody into Parliament to do it.
You can actually have somebody. I mentioned Douglas Hume, but I don't think it would be totally impossible to have a Douglas Hume type situation. The only problem would be, where do you find this safe seat? Now, in those days, we're talking about 1964, aren't we?
Yes.
1964.
63, actually, and the general election was in 64.
63. In those days, safe Tory seats in Scotland, you know, I'm not saying they were two a penny, but it's not so easy now to find this, even on the shadow cabinet model, you know, you would probably say it would be better if he was going to be, if anybody is going to be the shadow cabinet, it'd be better if they have a seat in one or other of the House.
But you can now resign peerages, so he could come back in the House of Lords and then stand the general election for a constituency in the House of Commons.
That's what David Frost, when I say David Frost.
That's right, yes.
I mean the other David Frost.
The other David Frost.
Yes, yes. I mean Lord Frost.
Yes.
Yes, I mean he threatened to do that.
That's right, and the Central Office wouldn't let him. He wanted to do it, and then Central Office vetoed him.
Threatened is perhaps
he was too dangerously conservative.
Well, you see, I'm ducking your questions.
You're ducking my questions brilliantly. The politician gene in the Johnson family is alive and well, but I think there are many people who would love to see Boris back as one of the most exciting politicians.
Well, I agree with all that. I agree with all that. Life on Exmoor would be fun. The helicopters would buzz up and down the valley.
And I think they'd like to see his father in the House of Lords as well. But there we go. Thank you very much to Stanley. In a moment, we'll be having a look at Stanley's new film.
Stay put until I'm back. And stay out of trouble.
40,000. Let's go. Oh my God. And this is the largest indoor image in the world.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Paul Spires is a much-loved part of this South London community.
When I first got here, it was so quiet, and after 3 months, I decided to buy myself a speaker. I started playing music. Everyone loved it.
So when 200 residents from Beckenham chipped in more than £3,000 to send a sweeper on a summer break to Portugal, it was a moment of great local spirit.
I'm overwhelmed with it. I'm just here to do a job to best of my ability, and the way they've reacted is brilliant.
Lisa Knight, an estate agent, said she started the campaign after becoming friends with Mr. Spears.
Last Monday, I bumped into him after work. It was a 30-degree day and he'd been working all day. So we stood and had a chat like we often do. And he explained to me that it was his birthday on Tuesday and he wanted to save up to go to Portugal because he's only ever been abroad once for his 60th birthday. And after he left, I decided to make the GoFundMe. So we shared it on the local Beckenham Appreciation Group on Facebook, which is huge, and it just flew away.
But Mr. Spears was unable to take the trip due to his employer's rules on accepting gifts. A solution appeared when a travel company spotted an opportunity to help out.
onthebeach.com had an amazing idea to run a competition whereby Paul would be the winner. He had to be aged between the age of 62 and 64, be loved in Beckenham, have the surname Spears and love Elvis, and so he still gets to go on holiday.
Viola have matched that £3,000 to donated to who I have wanted nominated, and obviously cancer research, which they've already done.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about the return of Boris, and you've sent in your views. Alice says, I agree with Stanley that Boris was treated very badly and got what they deserved. What a waste of an 80-seat majority. And Jeff has a very interesting suggestion. Boris would make a fine foreign secretary again and Nigel Farage a home secretary, as you once suggested, Jacob. Indeed I did. One of my more inspired suggestions, I think. But now, the moment you have all been waiting for, Stanley Johnson's new documentary in the footsteps of Marco Polo. In this visually stunning film, Stanley retraces the legendary movements of Marco Polo from Venice to the Forbidden City in Peking on a journey he has been determined to complete since boyhood.
Let's go, come on. On we go, folks. Come on. Yabbo! Hey, yabbo! Mr. Johnson, I very much doubt if I'm going to see this again in my lifetime. It's something I'm never going to forget. And I say to myself, what would Marco Polo have made of that? There's a lot of camels you could call a Camelot.
Well, fresh from yak riding along the Silk Road, the author and now presenter of In the Footsteps of Marco Polo joins me, still holding the State of the Nation flabellum, Stanley Johnson. Stanley, you determined that you wanted to do In the Footsteps of Marco Polo in 1961, is that right?
Well, Jacob, you very kindly say it's Stanley's film, but actually this film was made by a wonderful production company based actually not a million miles from where we are now in Bath, called One Tribe TV, working closely, and that's where the bridge-boarding becomes, closely with the Chinese. So it was a fantastic joint effort, but yes, it does pick up, if you like, where I left off in 1961. I brought with me the book of the book of the film, if you like, and on the front of this book, there, you see a picture of me with two of my colleagues, Tim Severin and Michael Larabiti, who was the photographer, having not got into China in 1961, having got all the way to the Chinese border on we started with 2 BSA motorcycles. We ended just in 1. I had to get it transformed so it could take the third.
3, yes.
The third. And we drove down the GT Road, Grand Trunk Road, for audience who all, I'm sure, know GT means Grand Trunk, or gin and tonic actually too, probably. No, I come to think
We'll give you one of those in a moment.
That's probably why it's known the GT Road. Anyway, we went all the way from Cornwall to Calcutta, which was a long haul, with 3 on 1 motorcycle. But then, brilliantly, the Chinese ambassador here in London, Zheng Ziguang, said, you've got to finish it off. You've got to finish it off. And we found support. I mean, a brilliant organisation called World Education, GEDU, Global Education, came forward, English Path as part of that, and produced the funds.
And instead of putting 3 people on a motorbike, you were riding a yak. What was that like?
Well,
was that
we did
comfortable?
ride a yak. They ride a lot of yaks in Western China. The point about a yak, I mean, this is the hunting community, but as you know perfectly well, horses are quite good for hunting, but when you go high at the altitude, the horse's lungs can't actually handle it, and whereas a yak's lungs, you didn't expect to be talking about yak's lungs here. You probably eat yak's lungs, actually.
Well, that's what you did on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, probably.
Yak's lungs, we could have done.
But tell me about Marco Polo, because when he went,
yes,
his visit was so extraordinary because nobody had any idea of China, and some people even thought he'd made it up when he got back.
You are so right. What, for me, was a complete eye-opener. Here we are. You've got Marco Polo leaving Venice in 1271 with his uncle, with his father Niccolo and his uncle Maffeo. It takes them 4 years to get to China. And what they do is they go through what we now call the stands. And they go through at a time when the Mongols had actually, contrary to what most people think about the Mongols, created a zone, a great route, the Silk Route, of peace and prosperity. And the Polos profited from that. And if I go to China today, as I have been, the polo is still a revered. I mean, we went to places where there were statues to Marco Polo.
But he was very brave because he was going into the unknown.
Yes.
Likewise, you must have been pretty brave because parts of the route are in places that are very poor, don't have modern conveniences. You wouldn't have had the normality of daily English life.
Well, you mentioned my 3 weeks. 3 weeks in the jungle, the normality of daily English life. I can survive without that. What was interesting to me, we didn't suffer. There was no hardship involved. We were unbelievably well looked after. But what was tremendously interesting, we were seeing parts of China which people don't often see. We were meeting people. We were actually, for example, for me, being a bit of a student of this period, I've been thinking about it for a long time, to get to Xanadu, for example, Xanadu, and to see that it's a city which, roughly speaking, was destroyed about 100 years after its zenith, and it remains this great, huge place, and you can still see the ruins of the palace and so on, which was deserted after the Mings succeeded the ones.
But it's such an interesting historic envelope. So 1961, Mao won't let you go. Now here we are, 2024. China has opened up, but there are still pretty closed bits which you were allowed to go through. Do you think they will open up more and these will become more popular and regular tourist routes?
It's a very, very good question. I suspect they absolutely will. The way I see it is the links between East and West, between Europe and China, they're bound to go on. They're bound to be expanded, and I hope they will be. There's some news coming out of the United States today. The overtures to China are going to be tremendously important, and I think we need to keep on that route ourselves. And if more people can do this sort of thing, that's wonderful.
It's the great foreign policy conundrum of our time. Well, thank you very much to Stanley. It's been absolutely brilliant having him. Up next is Patrick Christys. Patrick, what have you got on the bill of fare this evening?
Yes, we've got loads on tonight. Everyone's talking about these immigration numbers. I think for me, the big one that no one's really mentioning that much is the 118,000 people now on an asylum seeker waiting list, all of whom will be given the opportunity to actually apply for asylum under Labour. The Tories did do some good work at the fag end of their time in office. Will Labour completely undo it? I'm also going to be talking about some bizarre things. So some people, including a child rapist and a killer, are either not being sent to prison or being released from prison early, so that people who posted things online can go to jail. And a slightly left field one, Jacob, is it ever OK to drink your wife's breast milk?
Oh, good heavens, that sounds rather risque for me. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back on Monday at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I've been broadcasting from Somerset, where the sun always shines. All those rumours of rain this week have been appalling. A spin against God's own county, which we can ignore.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest Met Office weather forecast for GB News. Storm Lilian is knocking on the door, and it's going to bring some unseasonably wet and windy weather to many parts, but particularly in the north as we go through the rest of today, overnight into tomorrow. There is a system that's coming in from the west, and it's this that is Storm Lilian, already bringing some very wet weather across Northern Ireland this evening, and that heavy rain and the strong winds will feed into parts of Scotland, England and Wales as we go overnight. The highest rainfall totals likely to be across parts of southwest Scotland, also some eastern coastal parts where a bit of flooding and some disruption quite likely. The wind, the rain, the cloud will keep temperatures up, so a relatively warm but very wet and windy start to the day for many of us on Friday. As we go through Friday itself then, yes, it is going to be a wet start across eastern parts of Scotland in particular, but towards the west here there will be some hefty showers following in behind the persistent rain. Showers also for Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, for Northern England there will be some heavy rain around, but it's the winds that are causing the greatest concern. We're likely to see gusts of around 65 to 75 miles per hour in the most exposed spots, perhaps even a little bit stronger than that as a small core of very strong winds pushes through during tomorrow morning. Further south there will be some rain to start off with, but that should clear away towards the east as we head towards lunchtime, and actually the whole system that is Storm Lilian clears away towards the North Sea. And so for much of England and Wales it's going to be a largely bright sunny afternoon with temperatures a touch higher than today. Further north temperatures a little bit lower, but there will also be a scattering of showers, and some of these could be quite heavy. Looking ahead to the long weekend, and watch out for some heavy rain towards the southeast on Saturday. Elsewhere, quite a few showers to watch out for, but that rain in the southeast does clear away, and then for quite a few places, Sunday is looking a little bit drier, albeit some heavy rain crossing northern parts, and then more wet weather could push through in from the west on Monday, but it should be a mostly dry start. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We could be calling you with the news that you've won our latest Great British giveaway, an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash.
Hi, I'm John from sunny North Yorkshire, and I've just